God's people for 400 years had been in Egyptian bondage. They had cried out to him for relief, for freedom, for victory, and God has responded. He's raised up Moses to be the one to confront Pharaoh about the bondage of his people and to ultimately set them free. God, in a miraculous work, ends up doing that, liberates his people from Egyptian bondage, and he himself, his very presence, has been leading them through the wilderness towards the land that he had promised to give them. The point in which we enter into this narrative is they are standing on the threshold of entering into the promised land that God has led them to. Before entering in, they select 12 spies, one ultimately from each tribe of the nation of Israel, to go in and scout the land out before they enter into that place. It's good to have an idea of knowing what you're walking into before you walk into it. And so they select these 12 men to go into the land to scout it out and to come back and bring a report of the things that they have seen and saw and encountered. And that's where we're going to enter into this detail tonight. The spies have come back. And one of these spies, his name is Caleb. And I love Caleb. And Caleb was a boss. Caleb was a dog. He had that dogged nature about him. He was a man's man. God described him in his word actually a little bit further down in the chapter that we're going to be in as someone who had a different spirit. Now, you got to be something different for God to describe you as such a man. He had a different spirit about him. The characteristics that he possessed and displayed were just different than everybody else, and I think we have a great deal to learn from his life, specifically in this particular account that we're going to look at, Numbers chapter 13, starting at verse 25. God's word reads, "At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, 'We came to this land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. The Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan.' But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it.' Then the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.' So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.'" Our subject for today comes in the form of a question that I want you to consider, which is this: what do you see? I've always found it interesting how people can look at the same exact thing, but at times see completely different images or objects. So I want you to see this in action a little bit this morning. I got a series of pictures that I want you to look at. We're going to participate. This is a participatory exercise. And I want to know what you see at first glance when you see these pictures. So the first one, take a look at it, is a cat. And I want you to know, or I want you to tell me, do you see the cat going upstairs? Who sees it going up the stairs? Who sees it going down the stairs? Which one is it? I don't know. Take a look at this next one. It's a set of spirals. I want you to tell me, are they moving? Who says they're moving? Who says they're stationary? Look at it a little bit longer. Anybody else want to say it's moving now? Some say it's moving. Some say they're still. Take a look at the next one. Do you see a couple of alligators, or do you see a bird? Who sees the alligators? Who sees the bird? Take a look at this next one. Do you see an old man, or do you see a young woman? Who sees the old man? Who sees the young woman? Depends on which part of the face you're looking at. A couple more. Look at this one. Do you see a drinking glass, or do you see two faces? Who sees the glass? Who sees the two faces looking at each other? One last one. This one broke the internet a few years back, if you remember or not. Who sees black and blue? Who sees white and gold? Isn't that crazy? Hey, no lie, the first time I ever saw this dress, I saw black and blue. I have never seen it like that again. It is white and gold every single time. It is so weird how our eyes work. Every one of us were looking at the same images just now, but we differed in what we were seeing. Those variations happen because of differences in our peripheral vision, our perception of color and light, even the way that our brains receive and process information. This team of 12 men, they had all gone into the land together as a unit. They all saw the same landscape. They saw the same topography. They saw the same fruitfulness of the land. They saw the same people who lived there. They saw their size and their physicality. They all saw the same cities, the same walls, the gates, and the demographics. And the majority consensus was the same. The land is good. People are huge. The cities are strong. And there is no way that we're going to be able to possess it. But Caleb, for some reason, even though he had seen the same things as these 10 other spies, saw something different. Servants of God who are wholeheartedly trusting in Him with faith see differently. And I want to help you see what he saw and how he came to see it in that way this morning. 10 spies give a bad report. But Caleb, and we're leaving out Joshua this morning, Caleb and Joshua saw things in a different way. How were they able to do so? And how in the world does that relate to our life today? We'll check it out. First and foremost, the 10 saw this. They saw a promising land. So if we go back to verse 26, they're given a report, and it says that they came to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. They told them, we came to the land to which you sent us, flows of milk and honey, and this is its fruit. So when the spies returned and they give their report of the land, they admitted that this is a promising place. Now, we've been through, we've taken it all in consideration, we've seen all the things that the land has to offer. It is definitely a promising place. Really, it's a paradise in many ways, especially in comparison to where they had come from. So remember, these people had come out of 400 years of Egyptian bondage. Now, bondage is anything but paradise. Bondage is anything but milk and honey. Bondage is anything but fruitfulness. And so when they entered into this land, it was unlike anything that their eyes had ever seen. All they had known was poverty and need and want. They had never known abundance. They'd never even seen it. So when they entered into this land, I'm sure they were taken aback by the fact that it was just so prosperous, so abundant, so fruitful. And as they're giving that report, they admit it is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. It is indeed a land that has amazing fruit. Actually, previously in a chapter, it gives an assessment of that fruit. And they actually brought a cluster of grapes back with them. And it says that the cluster of grapes was so big that they ran a stick in between it and 2 men carried them on their shoulders back to camp. Now, those are some grapes. I've seen some big grapes before at the grocery store, but I've never had to call for an assistant to say, can you help me get these to the car? I can't carry them. These people had never seen anything like this. They were blown away at what this land had to offer, and they took observation of that, and they saw it as a very, very, very promising place. But that was it. It was just promising to them. Caleb didn't see a promising land. Here's the difference with him. He saw a promised land. He didn't just see a place that was promising. He saw a place that was promised. And that's important to understand because ultimately these people only saw something that they thought could be. But Caleb saw something that God had ordained as having been. This is not something that we have to go possess. This is something that has been given. This is a promise from our God that we can enter into this place. It was so much more for him than just the fruitfulness of that place and the idealness of its location. It was God's promise to his people becoming realized. Caleb didn't just see milk, he saw mercy. Caleb didn't just see honey, he saw hope. Caleb didn't just see grapes. He saw the grace of God and the fact that he would give this to them as his people. He didn't just see land, he saw love. Every bit of this that Caleb saw from his perspective was a work of God and a gift of mercy and hope and grace and love to a people that didn't deserve it and were not worthy of it. He said, this is God's promise to us. This is why it's so amazing. This place was a blessing from God, who is the giver of every good and perfect gift. Every good and perfect thing that we have comes down from him. It only took 40 days for 10 of these men to lose sight of that. 40 days is all it took. That's the amount of time they spent scouting out the land. And in a matter of 40 days, they had forgotten all about the mercy and the grace and the love and the hope and the promise of God. What do you see when you look around at the landscape of your life? Every one of us, I think, would have to admit that we have it really good. Now, that doesn't mean that your life hasn't been without hardship. It doesn't mean that your life hasn't been without trials or tragedies or adversities or pain. I mean, the Israelites of all people knew that. Their life had never been devoid of hardship. Their lives had been filled with all kinds of trials. They lived under Egyptian rule, slave to that kingdom, doing their bidding for the sake of their prosperity. They understood what hardship was. They knew what lack was. They knew what it was to be in need. They knew what it was to have growling bellies at night when they laid their head down on the pillow. They understood all those things. And that doesn't mean that our lives have been devoid of those things either. But at the same time, our lives are full of blessing and promise. Look around and see your health, for one. Look around at the fact that each and every one of us got in a car to get here this morning. You got clothes on your body, you've got shoes on your feet, you've got a roof over your head, you've got food in your pantry, money in your account, a job you get to work, friends by your side, a bed where you sleep, a shower where you wash. Are our lives devoid of blessing? Absolutely not. On top of that, look around and see a God who never leaves you. One who has given you an inheritance, who will never forsake you, who upholds you, who fights for you, who guides you, who is for you, and who goes before you, who credits you righteousness through his Son, and who has prepared a place for you, and who even now in this moment fills you with the power of his Spirit. We're blessed with the promises of God. How quickly do we forget those? How quick are we to look around the landscape of our lives and just see some of the negative things that are there and just flush out all the promises and the blessings of God? What do you see? Let us not be like the 10 of those spies who so quickly lost sight of God's blessing and promise. Servants of God who fully trust him in faith, they don't see what appears promising, but what is actually promised. They see the land that's promised, but listen, they don't forget the hand that's provided it. As we look around the landscape of our lives and we see all the blessings that have been given, all the things that we are not worthy and deserving of, let us never forget the hand that brought that into our lives. And always be quick to give him the glory for it. Always be quick to give him the praise for it. Always be quick to give him the honor for the things that we don't deserve, but we have anyway. Moving on from there, the 10 saw something else. They saw a promising land, but they also saw a giant enemy. And if we go back and look at their account of these people in the text, it is somewhat intimidating. In verse 28, after they give the report, there's a stipulation. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Now, in case you don't know who that is, just to give you some reference of how big these people are, Goliath was a descendant of Anak. And so these are big dudes. Like, these are big, gigantic people. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the hill country, the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan, all of which would have been formidable opponents. Now, if we jump down to verse 32, it says that they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. All the people that we saw in it are of great height. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. We seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we appeared to them. The most notably included and stressed detail of the spies' report was the giant people who occupied it. They spent more time on this part of the assessment report than any other. They come back, yeah, it's a good land, flows with milk and honey. Look at the size of these grapes, that's crazy. But let me tell y'all what's really important. You should have seen the people. Instead of going on and on and on and on and on about all the things they saw that were good about the land, they went on and on and on and on and on about the negative, about the thing that they saw that they thought could not be overcome. The descendants of Anak were there, and yes, indeed, they are formidable opponents. Not trying to minimize that whatsoever. Imagine if you walked into a city and all you saw were people walking around that were 8 and 9 feet tall. It'd be a little weird. There wouldn't be anybody you wouldn't walk up to and sucker punch in the back of the head. So we're not trying to minimize that in any way, but the 10 looked at them and they became filled with fear at the thought of battling these people. Because listen, you ain't just going to walk into somebody's home and kick them out. They're going to fight. And they knew that if this was the land that God had promised them, that there was going to have to be some battles that had to be fought. They weren't just going to walk in there, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, say, hey guys, we just want to ask you a favor. Let us know how you're feeling about it. But our God says he's given us this land. So if y'all wouldn't mind, like, just get on out of the way. It ain't going to work like that. There's going to be a battle that takes place, and the thought of that scared them. They said, we look like grasshoppers in comparison to these people. What quarrel, what fight does a grasshopper have with a boot? Is what they thought with these people. They're going to squash us. They will run us over. It's not even going to be a fight. They saw a giant enemy that was unbeatable in battle. But Caleb saw something different. Where they saw a giant enemy, Caleb saw a giant extraction. In verse 30, if we look at his response, he says that he quieted the people before Moses. So already he can sense the people are getting kind of worked up. They're all concerned. They're like, okay, God's brought us out of this land. He's led us to this land, but now there's giants there, and I don't know what we're going to do. Like, maybe we should go back to Egypt. I don't think it's going to work out. So there's a ruckus being brought up amongst the people, and Caleb, in true leadership fashion, calms everybody down and says, listen, let us go up at once and occupy it. You know what to occupy means? It's essentially, Caleb was essentially using a military term. He's saying, let's go in and seize control. Let's go in and take it. It means to remove one presence and to replace it with another. Sure, Caleb saw the same enemy. He was just as aware of their size and their ability as these other 10 were, but he also saw their ability through God to extract them, to get them out of the way. 10 are cowering in fear. Caleb's craving a fight. I told you this dude was a little bit different. This is where I really want us to try and learn some things. So I need you to stay locked in with me for a few moments. God, please help me not to mess this up the way you showed it to me. They say that seeing is believing. Heard that expression before? I don't believe that for one moment. Because the Israelites had seen God's liberation. The Israelites had seen all the plagues that God had sent in supernatural events to set them free from Egyptian bondage. The Israelites had seen the Red Sea part. Pretty spectacular event. The Israelites had seen God's presence at Sinai when he descended upon it to give them the 10 Commandments. The Israelites had seen God provide manna from heaven. Wake up in the morning, bread all over the ground. So just think about the things that they had seen. God's liberation of the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, his presence descending on the mountain at Sinai, the bread that they would wake up to each and every morning. At the same time, let's fast forward New Testament, Jesus walked the earth performing miracles that people saw and still did not believe. Raisings from the dead, healings of the sick, multiplication of food, blind being able to see, deaf being able to hear, people seeing these things and still not believing he's the Son of God. I don't think seeing is believing. I would actually amend that to say perceiving is believing. Because more times than not, what you perceive is what you're going to believe. And this is where I need you to hear me out, because I'm not saying that's a correct viewpoint either. And the reason why we need to understand that is because perspective is persuasive. That's why the devil loves to play with it. He will try to take your perspective and replace what is reality with an image that is an illusion. I think it's one of his best known tactics, the way in which he plays around with God's people. He played with the perspective of the 10, and they saw giants. But Caleb didn't roll like that. He saw with and held on to a different perspective. Where the 10 saw that they looked like grasshoppers in comparison to their enemy, Caleb saw that their enemy looked like grasshoppers in comparison to their God. What do you see? Some of you are standing up against some different giants in your own life. Whether that be a porn addiction or an alcohol temptation. It might be an eating disorder. It could be a medical diagnosis that you just received. Maybe it's anxiety or depression, suicidal thoughts, feelings of inadequacy, a bottomed out self-worth, any number of things that any one of us might be facing in this room this morning. I'm not telling you that they aren't big, and I know that they can seem like unbeatable foes because they've been around and they've occupied that land and that territory for a long time, but stop letting the devil play with your perspective. Giants are only as big as the things that they're compared to. And Caleb knew that God specialized in giant extraction. He can extract your addiction. God can extract your temptations. God can extract your disorder, your depression, your anxiety, your tendencies that you know aren't honoring or honorable. Don't let the enemy continue to occupy areas of your life that God has already given you and promised. Caleb looked at this place and he says, God has given us this place. This is ours to possess. And it don't matter who's there. It doesn't matter how unbeatable they may seem. It doesn't matter how big they look in comparison to us. And I feel like so many of us have been given a new life in Christ. You've been given territory. You've been given areas. You've been given a new life that God has said, this is yours to have. And yet we're still allow the enemy to possess places that he no longer has a right to. Why? Because those things just look like they cannot be beat. Those things have backed us down in fear, and they look gigantic to us. And so we would just rather even not bother with entering into a fight that we feel like we can't win. And so we don't. And instead of seizing and laying hold of promise, we just continue to give a bad report of those areas. Better to go back to Egypt is what these people are thinking at this point. Can you imagine? The people willingly saying, better to go back into bondage, better to go back into slavery than to go in and risk our lives over this place that God has apparently promised to give us. What kind of trade-off is that? It's not whatsoever. And I want some of you to be encouraged and uplifted this morning that even though you're staring down some big things, listen, do not. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Therefore, do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. God has given you the gift and the privilege of a free and victorious life in Him. He has taken you out of your old and put you into the new. Don't let the devil intimidate you into thinking that old self is better than walking in the new one. So much better to enter, so much better to go in. We are well able to occupy it, Caleb said. Why? Not because of any strength that they possessed of their own, not because of any power or might or any self-determination or self-will that they possessed of themselves, but because they had a God who was almighty to remove whatever stood in front of them, one who went before them and stood behind them and surrounded them on all sides. He says, that's why we can go in and occupy it. In the same way in your life, the things that you're going to come up against, whether it's beating that addiction, overcoming that anxiety, that depression, the suicidal thoughts, the inadequacy, the self-worth, the eating disorder, a medical diagnosis, whatever it may be, you cannot self-determine or self-will your way through those things. You have to go in with the banner of Christ and say, even though it's too big for me to handle, it's not too big for my God to take care of. And whatever He decides to do is what we're going to go forward with. We're well able to occupy it. So let's go. Caleb saw things differently. One more thing that the 10 saw. They saw a promising land. They saw a giant enemy. And they saw unconquerable cities. Their report was that the cities are fortified and very large. So in other words, their walls are high, their gates are strong, and it would be absolutely pointless to attack these people, especially considering the limited resources that the Israelites had from making such a long journey through the wilderness. Remember, these are people that had nothing. They came from nothing, and they had nothing. It's not like they had a city armory. It's not like they had been able to adequately train warriors while they were in bondage. The Egyptians weren't going to let those things happen. They had a seriously limited amount of resources. They weren't battle prepared or battle ready. And to attack these cities that were well established, that were full of warriors, that had all kinds of weapons already formed, and huge walls and big gates and impenetrable fortresses would have been an absolutely ridiculous thing to do. And so these 10 gave that report. They said, we see barriers that can't be overcome. And we see walls that can't be brought down. Cities that are completely unconquerable. Time to pack it up, move on with our lives, leave this promised land stuff behind because it's pointless. It's funny. This has nothing to do with my message, but to make the point, it's funny that a complete lack of resources meant nothing to a God who has all power. Because the first victory, these people didn't know it at the time, but the first victory that they would experience after they crossed into the promised land was where? Jericho. You know how they won that victory? They just walked around the walls and then they screamed at the top of their lungs. And they won. No swords, no spears, no bows and arrows. And it makes more sense. It's overwhelming now, right? The hand of God when we see it in this context, because these 10 are saying, we can't do it. We can't fight. We don't have anything. God says, I'm not asking you to pick up a sword. I'm just asking you to march around. That's how amazing, that's how powerful our God is. Unbelievable. Unconquerable cities, but Caleb saw something different. He saw an unstoppable cause. Once again, Caleb's report is different because what he saw was different. You go back in verse 30, he says that he quieted the people. He says, let us go up at once and occupy it. In the second half of that, he says, for we are well able to overcome it. Now, how can a man who sees the same barriers, the same walls, the same gates, the same fortresses, the same giants, how can he say that we are well able to overcome it? Why? Because he knew his God had an unstoppable cause. And that was to make his glory and his power and his presence known among the nations. And God's going to do that regardless. It don't matter who tries to get in the way of it. In Numbers chapter 14, if we were to skip down, after an uproar breaks out, Joshua and Caleb speak, and they get so upset because the people are fixing to decide, we're not doing this. We're not going in after all this stuff. We're not going to risk our lives on behalf of all this because there's no way that it can happen. And they speak up in Numbers chapter 14 and verse 6. It says that Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land that flows with milk and honey, only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them. And the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Caleb knew of all people that God had a plan and a purpose. And it couldn't be stopped by bricks and mortar or gates and forts. The 10 saw people they looked at and said, these people, we're like grasshoppers in comparison to them. They're going to devour us. Caleb looked at him and said, they look like bread to me that we're going to devour. What a difference in perspective. What a difference in his understanding of who God is and the faith and trust that he had in his plan and in his purposes. And I want us to see some gospel implications to this. I wonder how many times as believers, as followers of Christ, that we allow ourselves to be halted in our conquest of advancing the gospel when we come up against a barrier. God has given us a mission. He has set us apart as his people to go and make disciples of all nations. And I wonder how many times we get halted in our progression of advancing that kingdom just because we see a barrier that seems unconquerable. Just because we come up against a friend or a family member that says, I'm an atheist, or I'm an agnostic, or I'm not going to believe in that God stuff, or I've done that church stuff, that's a bunch of hypocrites, and I don't believe that Bible is a dusty old book, and we just pull back and retreat saying, okay, well, they're unreachable, I give up. On top of that, I think we also battle our physical, mental, social, financial, relational inadequacies. We look at our own lives and we think physically, I'm not able to serve in that capacity. Mentally, I don't know the Word of God like I should. Socially, I don't like talking to strangers. It's weird and it's awkward and I don't want to do it. Financially, I can't afford to go on a mission trip. Relationally, I can't really connect with anybody. And so I'm just going to withhold from sharing Jesus with anyone. Wow. What looks unconquerable to you? Listen, I of all people understand personality change. I was the kid that used to get whipped for not saying hi to people when they spoke to me because I was so shy. So don't tell me God can't change your personality. Don't tell me that God can't gift you. Don't tell me that God can't equip you to share his word. Don't tell me that he doesn't have an unstoppable cause. Don't tell me that he can't move past whatever barriers that you think you have to send that cause and those purposes and to see that plan be fulfilled. I am a living testimony of it. Trust me, this is the last place I'd ever want to be. I didn't know, what was a microphone to me? I would run and hide. It'd make me sick to my stomach. It still does every time I get up here and do this, because it is so far out of my comfort zone. I think maybe some of us have found a little bit too much comfort on this earth. It shouldn't be comfortable here. Number one, we should be homesick. And number two, we should be taking opportunities that make us uncomfortable. Why? Because eternities are at stake. And our God has given us a mission. Humanity has tried for centuries to stomp out the gospel. But you know what? It can't be stopped. Why? Because our God, like he did with his people going into the promised land, like he does with his church today, has an unstoppable cause to make his glory and his salvation known. And if God can free his people from bondage, if he can part the Red Sea, if he can back up the Jordan River, if he can rain bread from heaven, pour water from a rock, pull down the walls of Jericho, then I promise you he can bring you through, over, and around any barrier that crops up in your life. Servants of God who are trusting in him, even when they see impassable or unconquerable barriers, they believe in the name and the power of our God to execute his plans and his purposes regardless. What do you see?